Chapter 2. It all started a long, long time ago. It had been a blazing hot summer, but now the last of the tourists were reluctantly packing away their gear and heading back for the cities, suntanned and relaxed. There was a steady stream of traffic lumbering along the highways, back to wherever it was that they'd come from. The shop owners were counting the profits, the lifeguards were boarding up the front of the beach huts, and a couple of guys calling themselves Fang and Polygon were looking forward to having their turf back to themselves once more. The season was all but over, but still the sun beat down so hot you couldn't drink enough to hold it off. There was only two ways to keep cool. And when you'd spend every last nickel of your paycheck tinkering and tailoring with your motorbike, you couldn't afford air conditioning. So, you got on your bike and you rode fast. Very fast. It didn't matter where you rode. It was just the exhilaration of roaring down roads at ridiculous speeds with the wind in your hair. It felt good. It kept you cool, and, as long as you'd remember to siphon enough fuel from an unsuspecting tourist camper van, it was free. If they were to be honest with themselves, that's what Fang and Polygon would tell you they did best. Riding and stealing. They'd left school with nothing. They'd both completed an apprenticeship with the same mechanic in town. They'd even shared girlfriends. But things had changed, and now they both shared the same dream. To be the best rider in the country. These boys had grown up together. They'd shared everything. But now they were fighting each other. There could only be one champion. The mechanic had taught them everything there was to know about the art of motorcycle maintenance. He'd like to think that he taught them a little about life too. He'd realised that the boys would only end up in jail if no one taught them a trade, so he'd taken them under his wing. He'd been a fairly successful speedway racer in his day, and he also saw their obvious potential as professional racers. To start with, he'd entered them in local circuit races. If nothing else, it was good publicity for the garage, and before too long, they'd started winning. Their bikes were nothing special when compared to those used by some of the other racers, but growing up in the sticks had developed in Fang and Polygon a natural instinct for road racing. They could power along twisting, narrow lanes as if they were motorways. They could take bumps at full speed and hung in the air like phantoms, before crunching back into the grit 10 yards ahead of any rival who'd previously been alongside them. Maybe it was just because they had nothing really to live for. Or maybe it was just that they only felt truly alive when swallowing mile after mile of baking concrete at 150 miles per hour. But they were fast. As their skills developed, the mechanic spent less time in the workshop and more time managing his two protégés. Apart from towing away the occasional tourist who ran out of fuel on the interstate, he devoted his energies to calming the two riders. They had raw talent, sure, but he knew they'd end up as concrete fodder if they didn't learn to harness their energies. "You can be the fastest rider in the country," he told him. "You can have the reflexes of a world-class boxer and know a road better than the guys who laid it. But all it takes is one dozy driver in a pickup truck to pull out in front of you or fall asleep at the wheel, and no amount of skill on earth will save you." But Fang and Polygon chose not to listen. "You're saying slow down," Fang accused the old man. "No, I'm saying learn some control," came the cautious reply. "I've been working the roads of this state for longer than you've been alive, and I've seen too many young hotshots scraped off the tarmac. Have you ever seen a body that skidded along bare rock at 100 miles an hour? There's not much left to take home to the mother. Even the vultures need fish slices to get themselves a decent meal. But his words fell on deaf ears. I mean, the old man was old, right? It was his job to be boring. So the boys kept racing and winning until it became obvious to all around them that one day they'd be destined for greater things. The little they won from the local meets was ploughed straight back into their bikes. They gave up drinking in the local bars. They'd been chucked out so many times that actually giving up was purely academic, and they lived purely for racing. Seasons at the circuit came and went, until one day the mechanic died in his sleep. No big drama. But with no friends or family, everything was left to Fang and Polygon. The garage business was worthless. Business had been left to run down. But the mechanic left something of extreme value to the two men. His motorbike. It was an old bike, but maintained in perfect running order. Lovingly tweaked and tailored over the years, this monster could outdo anything that Fang and Polygon's bikes were capable of. They'd never seen the old mechanic ride out on it, and they'd certainly never even dared to ask for a ride themselves. But this was a racer's dream. It was sleek, smooth, and tuned to perfection. A raw, uninhibited speed machine. With this bike, both riders could clean up, and they both knew it. But who was going to receive it? Selling it and sharing the proceeds was out of the question. Both riders couldn't live with the idea of any other guy on this machine. Besides, how could you value a bike like this? No country in the world would pass it as street legal. And who would pay a large amount of hard cash for a machine that had to be ridden at speeds that made wiping out a real possibility? There were plenty of cheaper ways to commit suicide. No, this bike was special. This bike represented a lifetime of expertise and loving care. This bike was a pure one-off. And both Fang and Polygon wanted it. A race. It was the only answer. The rivalry between the two riders had been growing in intensity and ruthlessness for months. Now it was time to finish it once and for all. The date was set. A showdown to be held after the evening's racing had finished at the local track. Word spread quickly, and on the evening of the race, every rider in the district kicked his bike into life and roared along the coast. This was one showdown that no one wanted to miss. Chapter 3. Slater shifted his position on the cell's-only bed. He didn't offer me a chance to sit down. Pausing only to reflectively inspect his well-chewed piece of gum, he continued his story. The sun sank in the west as the hour of the race grew closer. The two riders hadn't spoken in days, and the tension around the track could be felt by all around. The distant thunder of more and more bikes descending on the track from all around the district could be heard in between the sharp, screaming bursts of those bikes already racing around the circuit. It was a beautiful night. The breeze was cool, breathing fresh air through the sun-baked trees and buildings of the coastline. But Fang and Polygon paid no attention. They weren't racing for the prize of the old man's bike. There was more to it than that. A lot more. Tonight would see the end to a rivalry that had become bitter to the point of open hostility. Both riders had been cautioned several times for violence on and off the track. Chase an opponent around a bend, kick down a gear and accelerate out into the straight, just a second before he did, then pull alongside. A quick nudge, barely a scraping of foot pegs, just before the other rider is finished coming out of the curve, was then enough to send even the wariest of opponents sprawling. It was easy, like stealing candy from a baby. So your opponent takes a fall. Big deal. Wasn't that all part of the sport? And if he's not man enough to take it, or if he cuts corners when it came to wearing decent protective gear, then that's just his own fault, right? That's the way Fang and Polygon raced. Man to man, first past the winning post was the victor, with no prizes for second. But the two riders had avoided racing each other for a while. Neither relished the chance of losing to the other, and they could make more money on illegal side bets while they were unknown quantities anyway. But tonight would put an end to all that. Polygon had made it clear that a lifetime ban from the circuit would be a fair price to pay for victory over Fang. There was no one around he couldn't beat, so there would be little point in racing afterwards anyway. The future looked bright, and there were plenty of opportunities for decent riders on the national racing circuit. These small-time cowboys could stick to their amateur asphalt races. Fang's bike stood in the pits, a series of sheds at one side of the track, buzzing with the sounds of mechanics and riders putting their finishing touches to their machines. The air smelled rich of oil and exhaust fumes as Polygon purposely strode through the smoke and glare from the spotlights along the row of machines and mechanics. He knew most of the regulars there. As he strode by, various people called out to him and offered good luck. He ignored them and carried on along the pit lane. A tall, attractive woman with auburn hair was leaning against one of the doors. "Hello, hotshot," she teased. This was Natasha, one of the quickest female riders around. She would give most of the men a run for their money too. She was also Polygon's girl. She'd grown up tough, the only daughter in a big family. Her brothers also raced on the circuit, and had all been regularly beaten by both Fang and Polygon. "Evening, Georges," Polygon replied calmly. He knew that only while he kept winning would he keep Natasha by his side. This was another factor in his obsession to beat his arch-rival. "Is he out of the way?" he inquired. "Last seen chained to O'Shea by the judge's box," came the conspiratorial report. O'Shea was another hot rider. He was fast, but he had never had the ruthlessness to cut it as a top rider. No one could be sure, but most people figured the reason was that he actually enjoyed the riding and would leave the winning to the hotshots. Either that, or he actually liked life too much and didn't fancy ending it spread over a couple of 100 yards of asphalt. A bit of a philosopher was O'Shea. Either way, people respected him for it. He would always offer a word of advice, even if it wasn't exactly what you wanted to hear. As Polygon and Natasha gazed from overside of the track, they could see that O'Shea and Fang were deep in conversation. "He can get all the advice he wants," muttered Polygon, "but it's not going to help him tonight," he added under his breath. "Come on, it's now or never," urged Natasha, moving close behind him and following his gaze across the track. "He'll be back soon." And with that, the two figures glanced around and moved off. Nobody noticed them entering Fang's pit stop. All eyes were busy attending to their own bikes. Silently, the two of them got to work. Closing the doors behind her, Natasha followed Polygon into the gloom of the garage. A neon light fizzled on overhead as Polygon knelt down to the side of Fang's race-prepared bike. He reached inside his pocket and withdrew a small pair of wire cutters. Pausing only momentarily to look around, Polygon winked at Natasha and then got to work. "Quickly," she whispered. "He's on his way back." A couple of snips, not all the way through, but halfway through the brake cables of Fang's bike, and Polygon was finished. "It's done," he whispered, and stood up. Natasha had already killed the light and was peering through a crack in the doors. She gave the thumbs up, and the couple stealthily escaped back out into the flood-lit, smoky haze of the stadium. The door had just fallen closed behind them when from around the corner they heard the voices of Fang and O'Shea returning. The two rivals poetically walked straight into each other. They gazed fixedly into each other's eyes. There was 15 minutes to go before the start of the race. Without saying a word, the two pairs walked away in opposite directions. Natasha and Polygon waited for the sound of Fang's bike getting kicked into life. The roar of his engine signalled his departure, and Fang raced out of the pits towards the starting line. Natasha and Polygon turned to each other and smiled. It was time to finish this business once and for all. After walking swiftly to his own pits, Polygon leapt onto his own bike and was soon following Fang's trail towards the starting line. Apart from the deep rumbling of two engines revving side by side on the starting line, the circuit was silent. "Good luck, buddy," sneered Polygon. Fang turned and stared to his rival. "You'll need it," muttered Polygon. Yeah, bite me," sneered his opponent. The starter raised his flag. Both riders revved hard, and then the flag dropped. Both engines screamed, and the two riders surged forward. The race had begun.